I started making these Amigurumi plushies, and they're really easy to make. You pretty much just start with a circular shape. Once you learn how to make the sphere, the circle shape, you learn how to manipulate the shape by increasing and decreasing your stitches as you go. And then once you do enough of that, you can learn how to make the ball, but then turn that into different shapes. So then you can learn how to do shapes like this. They're all 3D. This is all one piece. I didn't attach the ears on later. I made the ears and actually built this one upside down, so almost like they look like legs when I got started, and then I just built it up until you can just see the closure right here at the end, just a little ring at the end, and then you got stuffed. And then of course you make all your little extra pieces and just stitch those on later with the same color yarn as the body so that you can't tell where you sealed them on. But they're actually really easy to make once you get started. And your stitches, if you're using a small enough hook like the one that I was using, and you keep your stitches nice and tight, you won't see any of the fluff in there. I really stuffed this guy pretty good, and you can't see in between. You don't see the fluff if you squeeze him. You can't see little holes or gaps in there, so that's how you know your stitches are good and tight. Now for the ball, you can make the ball all one piece. You can just start from the bottom, work your way out until you get to a point where you're starting to make just rows of single crochets, and then you eventually you'll start to, as you're getting to that halfway point, you're starting to decrease until you get to the top, and then you just use a little plastic sewing needle like this, and you just feed a string through and pull it tight. But this one was actually made in two pieces. I made two halves. I made the white half, and then I made the red half, and I actually used the black in the middle to attach the two halves together. That way I had a little bit more of a smooth closure on this. You didn't see a big chunky piece of yarn. It's just this light little bulge on the black band that goes around, and this piece was made separately and hot glued on, but you could attach it with string if you wanted to. I've got a few different supplies here to show, so you can see kind of how I set this up and some things you might need. So some good scissors, just so you can cut your yarn easily. You don't want to use some old dull scissors that you're going to be chopping and never getting your string cut clean. I've got a tool that I use to fluff it. So sometimes to get up in little small areas like in the ears here, you use a tool like this. This is just a poker. I don't know, you could use a pencil, a pen, anything to kind of get up into those small areas and make sure it's fluffed. I've got my two different needles. I've got the plastic chunky needle that's easy to see and easy to get the yarn through the eye. But then I've also got, in case you prefer to use a thread, maybe a little something more invisible so you can't really see your stitches, because this is small enough where it will hide. Even though it's white, you'll be able to pull it tight enough and it can hide in there. But with this, you definitely want to use a smaller needle. Something sharp though, sharp enough to be able to poke right through the polyfill that's inside there, because you'll find that sometimes your plastic needle isn't sharp enough on the end to poke its way through, and it'll kind of get stuck if you're trying to poke it through the polyfill to hide the end of your string. Of course, I prefer to use a bigger, fatter crochet hook, but for projects like this, you're going to have to use a smaller one. It doesn't have to be anything too small, so just not the biggest size that you've got. So maybe more of a medium size. This one's an H. I don't know if you could see that there. Yeah. So something a little bit smaller than what you would prefer to use. And then I have my polyfill here. Something happened to my bag, so I've got all my polyfill in a basket, which actually works out better. I like it better that way because I can really cram it into the basket and I have easier access to it. So when I need polyfill, I just reach into the basket and take out what I need, instead of having to mess with the bag and having to have a packaging sitting around or a ripped end that doesn't look so nice. I'm just using cheap yarn. This is just the Walmart brand yarn, whatever you got. It doesn't have to be anything fancy. You want it to be a thicker yarn. You don't want to use anything that's too thin, just because you're going to be making tons and tons of stitches. And the thinner the yarn, of course, the smaller your project will come out. And also, the more chance you'll see in between your stitches, you'll see some gaps and holes where you'll be able to see the fluff inside. And you don't want to see the fluff. You want to hide it. You want it to be nice and tight. So just a regular, medium thickness on your yarn, something like this. I've got pieces here to make a little shy guy, so I'll show all my pieces look like, and I'm going to be putting it together today. Mostly everything is done. I just have to I have to make the eyes and then really just stitch everything on and trim up all the extra string. So I'll show what I've got here for that. So for the body, kind of tried a different stitch on this one. So he's got a flat bottom. He's got this little area here where his belt is going to go, which is going to be done later on with the black yarn. So this is where his body's going to be. Of course, he's flat right now. I haven't stuffed him, and the hole is up at the top. So I'm going to have to open that up a little bit so I can get my fluff inside there. But it won't be hard to stuff. I've also got his little arms and his feet, which are going to be stitched on separately. So I just made like little small tubes. And I started with the magic circle, and then I did, I alternated by increasing and then a single crochet one time around, and then I did 3 rows of single crochets and then just closed up the end. So it's a little harder to just explain it later on, but that's how I did the hands and the feet, same way. So they're just little flat pieces, and they're round on one end. That's where the ring started up there, and that's where I stitched it together just using my little orange needle. And then I did the same thing with the feet. So I got these little, I'm going to attach them where they were stitched up on the bottom. So that's where I'll be attaching them to the body. I know his feet are supposed to be on the bottom, but I want to be able to have this little flat area here on the bottom where he can sit up straight. So that's why I've got that. I have his face. That's right here. I just kind of crocheted around until I got to about the size that I wanted for his face. And then this is going to go behind. This is what's holding his mask on. So this is going to go kind of, if I can explain it well before I put it on, it's going to go behind the face. So it'll kind of look like that and wrap around. And of course I have to make 2 little dots here for the eyes. And then I'll get all that put on in just a second. The blue string at the top, to explain that, that's my stitch marker. So I've seen some people use the string that they are crocheting with, so sort of the tail. I've seen people use the tail of their string, like this little piece here, where your magic ring starts, as their stitch marker. The only problem with that is, I'll show why I don't like that. So I did that method on this guy. I actually I used this. I fed the string that was the tail of my magic ring. I used that to feed through every time I went around one to mark my stitch. But the problem is when you're all done, you kind of see it. It creates almost like a seam, and you can't really tell from this angle very well, but there's a groove right here, and that's going all the way up. And that is from that stitch marker, just kind of creating a little bit of tension there. And I did the same thing here. So if you can kind of tell, everywhere else it's round, but then you have this little dent here, this little dimple that was created because of that stitch marker being thrown in there. So what I do instead is I just use a totally separate string that's not connected to the piece that I'm working on. I use a different color so that I can see it, something that contrasts well, so I don't accidentally think it's something else or think it's a scrap and throw it away. And that is my stitch marker. So I just cut a piece that's long enough to work with so it's not going to slip out, but not too long that I'm going to accidentally crochet it into the piece that I'm working on. And that's my stitch marker. And when I'm done, after every row, I just move it up one, and then it's not fed into the rest of the piece, so it doesn't create any weird angles or grooves like that I don't want on there. So we'll get this guy stuffed, and then I'll start attaching all the pieces on there, and you'll see that really with just some really basic shapes, tubes, strips. This was just a single crocheted onto a chain. I don't even know how many. I didn't count. I make my own patterns, and I don't count. I just sort of do what looks right. So I just looked at it and figured about how long I would need it to be. So that's what that is. Still haven't decided yet if I want this to be the part that shows or this to be the part that shows. But we'll figure all that out when we go to put it all together. think I have him filled as much as I want him to be. Every so often, I just kind of try to reshape it and make sure it doesn't feel like it's too lumpy and that I have the fluff where I need it. I also pull off small pieces at a time, just a little bit, instead of a big old hunk of this polyfill, because I don't want there to be any uneven spots on here. I want it to be, if I have smaller chunks of it throughout here, it'll be less lumpy. I also don't want to lose my definition, so if I overstuff him, I'll sort of lose this little groove that I've got going on down here. That's supposed to be where his little belt is going to be, and so I need to make sure I maintain that, and it's getting to be almost a little too full, so I think I'm going to stop it right there. I did pull out a row of stitches. You probably saw me tugging on this, and it was picking up some of the polyfill. That's why it was giving me some trouble. But I think I'm just going to end my row right here, and you can kind of see how I do that. So right now I can pull out my stitch marker. I don't need it anymore, but save it. You know, save your little scraps of yarn because it's good for all that stuff. So I have, I'll just cut my yarn free, but I want to be able to still use a needle. So I don't cut my string shorter than my needle. I want it to be at least twice as long as my needle so I can get the needle in there and do what I need to do. So go ahead and thread your needle, and let's tie it off by looking at our last stitch here. Wherever that is, right here, we'll go into our last stitch. That loop that's sticking up, that'll secure everything. A couple of times I like to be really sure. And then you can just sort of, I'm just going to go around in sort of a spiral motion. So I'll just go into a few of these stitches that are sticking up, go under, and then over, and under, and over. And I don't pull it tight until I get to the very end. Under and over. Try not to pull up any polyfill, because then you'll feed it into what you're doing. Your yarn will just sort of start to pull it right through, and you'll see a little stripe of white. So unless you're doing a white amigurumi, you don't want to do that. You're gonna go under and over, and then if you want just one more right where you started, just for good measure, over and under, and then you can pull it tight and then make your knots, so that way your top is covered up. All right. So now I know that Shy Guy has that little peak on top of his head, so this is going to be his back up here. And the stitch came out with this shape to it where it's flat on the front, and this is his side view, and then rounder on the back, because when I decreased as I was going up, I decreased only in the back, and it gave it a different look. And you can sort of see that if you see this little twist in here, this little S shape, that's where every time you saw a little decrease, and as I got higher up, I was doing a decrease here and here, but always on the back. That way I didn't see it, because it does change the look of your stitches. I wanted the front to be nice and smooth. I wanted the back to be where all that is. So I just have the string kind of reinforced pretty good coming out of his head, and I'm just going to sort of do like this and just sort of pull the top of the head down a little bit and bring that so it creates that little peak. And then I'm just going to knot it in place, so it'll kind of give us a little bit of a shape there that we're going for. I think I'll go up inside and go backwards so you don't see it. So right here, I'll just come and poke it out like so. So I'm going to start putting all my pieces on there. I got this little peak on his head. I'm going to start to attach these pieces, and I think I will use the white thread for some of it so I can hide those stitches. I just wanted to make sure that his bottom was staying flat, and I could press on that every once in a while to make sure he sits up the way he's supposed to. I'm going to attach this in not too many places, just maybe once on the back, one on each side, and then maybe a little bit right here in the front, but that's going to get covered up by the face or a mask part anyway. So let's get these pieces put on there. now I'm just putting the little hands on there. I got the face, I've got the band, I've got this little peak in the back, and then I'm just attaching the little hands. I'm using the red yarn so that you can't see it, because right here, if I was going to use the white thread, you definitely would see the stitches, and I don't want you to be able to see them. So I'm just going to do a few little stitches right here at the edge, and then knot my string where I started it. He's just about there. He's got all his little pieces on there. I do need to give him his belt, so that's what I'm going to do right now. And his eyes. So let's do the eyes first. Let's just do the magic ring. Do his little eyes. So I'm just going to do, I think, a little small circle, maybe 5 or 6 single crochets around my ring. So do 1, 2, 3. I want his eyes to be big. That's 4. Let's do 6, 5, and that's 6. And I want the eyes, of course, to be uniform. So let me just pull this tight. So get a circle. Then I'll attach it together. Alright. I'll just do a little knot in the back to make sure it doesn't come apart. I could trim my strings, and I'm not going to stitch these on. I'm going to hot glue them on, but I need 2 of them, and I'm going to almost stretch it like an oval for his eyes. So I got his 2 eyes. I'll hot glue them on right here, and I'm going to hot glue on the back where the knot is. Make sure I put enough glue all around. We're running out. Okay. I don't really like to do a whole lot of gluing on here because I like them to be nice and soft. So don't glue a whole lot, just a little bit for those small little pieces that get annoying to stitch. I could have glued the whole thing together, but I really just wanted his little body and his little arms and legs to stay soft and pliable. And if this was glued, you wouldn't be able to mess with them so much. So here's our other eye. And tug on that to get the shape we want. There's our knot. Put some glue right there. Make sure you got glue on the knot. Okay. And hide your strings. Alright, there's his 2 little eyes. We had to give him a mouth. Oh, I'm picking up strings everywhere. So I'll show you how I'm going to do that. Just a really small little mouth, kind of like the nose on Totoro. I just did a little tiny thing on there. So I'm just going to use the regular needle, but you really have to work to get the yarn through the eye. So you have to squeeze it good. And then maybe we'll put it right here. We'll give him a little mouth. Let's go a little further down. All right. Yeah, just like that. But I'm going to wrap around a couple of times. So I'm going to go make it a little bit thicker. Be wrapping around a couple of times. I'll knot it. Maybe once. And then you just trim it. And you can tuck in your ends. I don't like to cut it too close because just in case my knot decides to loosen, I don't want that to happen. I'll just use the end of my needle and just kind of poke it in there to hide the rest of your string. Like that. There you go. There, now he just has this little tiny mouth there. And now he's going to need a belt, which I'm just going to chain. I got a piece of black string. I'm just going to chain until I get the size I want, and then I probably will use a little bit of glue to stick my belt on there. All right, so make a slip knot. And I'm not really sure how many I need to chain, but I'll just go until it looks right. It's stretchy, so I'm not going to bother counting. If I ever make this guy again, I'll probably kind of perfect the pattern and make it better. So I wouldn't even worry about trying to remember exactly how I did it. I don't want to make one exactly like him. If I do him again, I'll change up his design a little bit. So he's done. I just made him a little chain here, and I put a tiny bit of glue right here under his chin to glue it on. The fun thing is that once they're made and they're sealed up and all their fluff is in there, you can kind of reshape them and kind of give them a squeeze to give them a new shape, or to make their bottoms flat enough to set them down. But I've got his little arms on there in such a way where they're facing downward, but depending on how you wanted them, you could face them up, or you could have them straight out, or you could even put them closer to the front, like they're wrapping around his belly and his little feet. I didn't even stuff them. I just left them flat and stitched them right on there with the red yarn. This little guy is, he could sit on a shelf. You could string him up from his little head if you wanted to. And all his little pieces are secured on there. I feel better about the eyes being glued on there, because I know that I wouldn't have been able to get around those edges with the small string well enough to make sure that was secured on there. So I've got them glued on, but everything else I've got stitched on there, so it's all secure and he's ready to go.